While German railways never had brake vans, they did have something similar, albeit not for braking. Güterzug-Gepäckwagen. More about that term later. Unlike brake vans in Great Britain and cabooses in North America, their continental European cousin is a mystery to many and often simply overlooked, despite the enormous importance it held for about a century. But their use in history is not that much different from brake vans and cabooses. You see, for the longest time, a goods train required many more people than just the engine crew. In particular, these are the chief guard, who is the head of the entire train, sometimes additional guards, a packmaster, shunters when small station without enough own personnel had to be served, as well as all the brakemen operating the hand-brake wagons along the length of the train. And while the later ones had their respective cabins we talked about in an earlier video, the rest of the crew had to go somewhere too. A dedicated wagon was needed, or at least an additional wagon, as it wasn't until 1885 Prussia developed the first proper guards wagon. Until then, old baggage wagons from passenger trains were used, with some being more than 40 years old, a practice which continued even after the introduction of guards wagons, with some of the German state railways never building dedicated guards wagons at all. While reusing old baggage wagons seems to make sense, as the official German designation for guards wagons used to be Güterzug-Gepäckwagen, goods train's baggage wagon. This term kinda misses a point. Sure, the train crew brought their own luggage, and things like tools, lamps and end-of-train markers had to be stored somewhere. But the main purpose for the central room was not for storing baggage, but rather for offering the crew members a place to be, warm up and rest. The later two especially include the brakemen in their unheated man-sized cabins. The crew room was as such equipped with wooden benches, a table, a stove which could also be used to heat up food, and access to a toilet. The most important uses of the guards wagons, however, at least from the perspective of management, was to give the packmaster a clean workspace to do the freight papers and to enable the chief guard to observe the train, hence the raised section of the roof found on most designs. As such, the term Güterzug-Begleitwagen, German for goods train's escort wagon, seems much more fitting, albeit quite a mouthful while still being very vague, which is why I prefer to use the term guards wagon, a neutral term that can also be used to describe brake vans or cabooses, but there were some major differences. First and foremost, in difference to their British counterparts, they were not used for braking. They were equipped with a handbrake, but not loaded with ballast, and as such with their light weight, stood no chance braking a whole train. After all, that is what the brakemen were for. Secondly, the guards wagon was usually, we come back to that in another video, not located at the end of a train, but rather directly behind the locomotive. And that had a very good reason. As it isn't used in assisting the locomotive while braking, there is no compulsory reason for it to be at the back. And directly behind the locomotive, it can be much quicker accessed by the driver and fireman, who made use of its accommodations during stops too, and also makes it much easier to communicate with the chief guard. Until the introduction of brake pipes, the guards wagon was connected to the locomotive's whistle with a leash, allowing the chief guard to signal in case of any emergencies. But very much like brake vans, guards wagons could also come in multiples. They were not freely used, but rather permanently allocated to a crew, and as such had their own circulation schedules, which meant crews could not only keep their belongings on them, but also took great care of their wagon. On the downside, however, this meant they had to be returned empty when there was no return trip, which was usually done with the help of another freight train, resulting into 2 or 3 guards wagons behind the locomotive. It also required additional shunting, as from the long lines of idling guards wagons, like you would usually see in large shunting yards, for every train, a very specific one had to be picked out, instead of simply taking the first one in line. The final Prussian design of 1913 also became the most numerous, with about 7,200 examples built until 1929, long after the Deutsche Reichsbahn, the national railway of Germany, had been formed. In fact, most of them were only built past its formation. But it was also soon after their star began to sink. The introduction of brake pipes in the mid-1920s diminished the size of train crews significantly, and with the Great Depression diminishing goods traffic too, the historically always scarce wagon type was suddenly in a surplus. Only the desire to increase the speed of goods trains in the late 1930s led to the development of an entirely new and modern design, built in various states of simplification in large numbers during the war, ultimately being replaced by a very sparse wartime design altogether. While after the war, guards wagons were short in supply once again, because of structural changes in train operation, as well as the rise of diesel and electric locomotives, where the guard could usually ride in the unoccupied second cab. The number of trains requiring a guards wagon was expected to decline. As such, only the Reichsbahn in East Germany developed and built a proper new family of guards wagons, while the Bundesbahn in West Germany tried to span the gap with the makeshift solutions. Guards wagons derived from covered wagons, repurposed old passenger wagons, cabin tenders, as well as ending the limiting allocation to a respective crew. But these are different stories altogether. Thank you for your interest. I hope I could clear up the mystery about these so important wagons. What railway related question do you have? I also have to thank my channel members Dave Heise, Flipschwip, Kay Frankly and Lucas Ilskens for making this video possible. If you want to support my art project too, you can find all the links in the video description. Thanks again and see you soon here at Steel Bridge Models.